let's look at Epstein in here. After a commercial, the next segment began with images. The lineup included Jeffrey Epstein, wealthy money manager who had been accused of sexually abusing underage girls. Charges became public. Press accounts enumerated from famous acquaintances: Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, Kevin Spacey. You know, it's really funny. Kevin Spacey, another, Tucker Carlson friend, just like Alan Dershowitz is. And described trips to his plane, a so-called Lolita Express. Despite sworn accounts from more than a dozen women, Dershowitz and his team secured a deal in which Epstein pleaded guilty to minor charges and served only a brief sentence. On The View, which was hosted by 4 women, Dershowitz described the experience as fraught. It is a case that was very, very, very difficult and very painful for me because I saw real victims out there. I'm a very strong supporter of the Me Too movement. Sure. But he said an attorney is obligated to defend the rights of the accused. I think of myself like a doctor or a priest. If they wheel Jeffrey Epstein into the emergency ward, the doctor is going to take care of him. One of the hosts, Abby Huntsman, pointed out, it does get more complicated for you in your personal life. In 2014, Virginia Jeffrey, one of Epstein's victims, stated in a court filing that Epstein lent her out for sex to his friends, Dershowitz among them. Dershowitz has strenuously denied the allegations and maintained that Jeffrey is a near-pathological liar engineering an extortion plot. Jeffrey's claims about him have never been directly tested in court. Instead, they have featured as side arguments in civil suits brought by others. 2 weeks before the taping, though, Jeffrey had sued Dershowitz directly for defamation. On the air, Dershowitz said that he welcomed Jeffrey's lawsuit. I also welcome her coming on the show and accusing me face-to-face, he said. I've been falsely accused, he went on more intently, so I am welcoming this trial. He rubbed his hands together. This is the first opportunity I have to conclusively prove my innocence. Huntsman read a statement from Jeffrey. My abusers have sought to conceal their guilt behind a curtain of lies. My complaint calls for the accounting to which I and the other victims are entitled. She's right. She's entitled to an accounting, Dershowitz said. I have. Alan Goldberg said the segment was running out of time. Invited the FBI to the trial. Alan, you got to stop. So that, Alan, you want me to give the book away? We've got to give the book away. Before the show cut the commercial, he got in the last word. My reputation is more important than my book. That's anti-Semitic. Why bother mentioning he rubbed his hands together? Wait, what? It's the New Yorker. They're offering I can't tell if you're joking or not. It's the New Yorker giving an accounting of like exactly what happened on The View. Oh, you are joking. Okay, thank God. I couldn't tell. Is there a difference between ordinary rape and statutory rape? Yes. It is difficult to prosecute rape in many instances due to many different, obviously due to living under a patriarchal structure. And statutory rape, at least, automatically implies that the victim can't consent. So it is technically supposed to make it easier to prosecute rape charges. That's it. Alan Dershowitz's goal here is to try and make it harder to prosecute statutory rape. That's it. I don't know. It's very odd they wanted to do that, but it's very odd that that was his goal here, to just make it harder. Dershowitz likes to say that he met Jeffrey Epstein through his friend Lady Rothschild, the former Lynn Forrester. In 1996, Forrester, who had actually not yet married into the Rothschild dynasty, suggested he would enjoy getting to know Epstein, an interesting autodidact. Epstein, who had grown up in Coney Island and dropped out of college, was an unimposing person, described by one friend as shy, weird, introverted. But he had luxurious houses, a private plane, and huge amounts of money to spend. He was friendly with many famous men and was drawn to intellectuals. Dershowitz, to longtime friends, has an enduring fascination with fame, society, and wealth. Charles Fried, a distinguished jurist who taught with Dershowitz at Harvard Law School, told me, if you get a chance to go to fancy places with lots of rich people and fly around on private planes, I think he probably finds that hard to resist. Epstein flew to Martha's Vineyard and visited Dershowitz, bringing a bottle of champagne. They found common interests. I wonder what those common interests were. Suspiciously, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Alan Dershowitz's piece was written 1 year after he met Jeffrey Epstein. If he met Jeffrey Epstein in 1996, didn't he write the statutory rape Los Angeles Times article in 1997? Or was it before? But it was around that time. It was 1997. So 1 year after he met Jeffrey Epstein. We talked about science. We talked about academia. We talked about Harvard. Epstein, like Dershowitz, had come from a humble background. In the 70s, he'd been a trader and a wealth manager of Bear Stearns. Epstein has said that he refused to accept clients with less than $1 billion in assets, but Wexner was the only client he has ever named. In New York, Epstein lived in one of the largest private homes. This is mostly Epstein. Come on, give me more about Dershowitz and Epstein. Maria Farmer, who worked at Epstein's mansions in those days, told me that there were often young girls around. An aspiring artist, she had been introduced to Epstein at a gallery downtown where she was exhibiting her paintings. He bought one, insisting on a discount. Eventually, she agreed to work the door at his house, signing in tradesmen, decorators, friends. Farmer said that new girls arrived every day, some of them wearing school uniforms. She recalls asking, why are all these girls coming and going? She was told that they were auditioning for work as models for Victoria's Secret. In September 1996, Epstein invited Dershowitz to meet Wexner, who was throwing a party for his 59th birthday. They flew together to New Albany, Ohio, where Wexner had a 300-acre estate. Les Wexner, for the record, is Ohio legend, basically. With a Georgian manse for himself and a large house for Epstein. The guests, Dershowitz says, included John Glenn, the senator, former astronaut. And, okay, that's crazy to say, wait, isn't John Glenn, he is is he the guy that flew one time? Or that was a different senator, I think. I think he was this guy was a... No. This is not the... I'm thinking of the guy who went up and threw up. That's not John Glenn. No, John Glenn was a real deal astronaut, not the one who went... Not the one who was the phony. No, John Glenn is actually the real astronaut who became a senator, and not the senator who flew one time and threw up a lot. Famously, he was on the Appropriations Committee, and not John Glenn, the other guy. Is it Jake Garn? Yeah, okay, Jake Garn is what I'm thinking of. I think. Yes. So Jake Garn, a former insurance executive, served in the United States Navy, and literally, I think it's this guy, right? It is Jake Garn, I think. Yeah, this is it. Garn became the first sitting member of the United States Congress to fly in space when he flew aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery as a payload specialist during a NASA mission, because he was sitting on the Appropriations Committee, and he basically was like being very annoying about giving money to NASA. And then so he wanted to go fly in fucking space with NASA. So he did, and then he threw up a lot when he was in space. And I think, like, still to this day, they use that as a unit of measurement or something. Like a vomit scale. No one knows who this dude is. Well, I mean, I've talked about it before. I talked about it before, and I only know about it because of Marat. How do you know all these fun facts? Why do I know fun facts about aerospace history? I don't know, because I have a brother who is an aerospace engineer. Here, space adaptation syndrome. With seasickness and car sickness, space motion sickness symptoms can vary: mild nausea, disorientation, to vomit, intense discomfort. The most extreme reaction yet recorded was felt by Senator Jake Garn in 1985 on a space shuttle flight. NASA later jokingly began using the informal Garn scale to measure reaction to space sickness. In most cases, symptoms last from 2 to 4 days. When asked about the origins of Garn, Robert E. Stevenson said, Jake Garn was sick, pretty sick. I don't know whether we should tell stories like that. But anyway, Jake Garn has made a mark in the astronaut corps because he represents the maximum level of space sickness that anyone can ever attain. And so the mark of being totally sick and totally incompetent is 1 Garn. The whole point is, Garn's purpose on the mission was in part to subject him to experiments on space motion sickness. Garn did not become sick on the vomit comet before STS-51D. All 3 astronauts on Skylab 3 suffered from nausea, although the 3 Skylab 2 had not. The illness affected their work during the first days, worrying NASA doctors. Okay, that was a brief aside on something completely irrelevant to the Dersh. So, John Glenn and former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres. It's like odd. Jeffrey Epstein knows all the former Israeli prime ministers. How did that happen? Like Ehud Barak, who was caught leaving and entering his Manhattan compound as late as like 2016. So strange. Anyway, Dershowitz was quickly assessed his role. I was Jeffrey Epstein's intellectual gift to Leslie Wexner. Epstein thought of himself as a patron of academia, was particularly drawn to Harvard. In 1990, he and Wexner had helped fund a new building for Harvard Hillel. Epstein also funded research into the history of science, but he wanted to be more than a donor. He wanted to be a member of the community. By 1998, Jeffrey Epstein was serving on the advisory board of the Harvard Society for Mind, Brain, and Behavior. After Larry Summers became president of the university in 2001, Epstein flew him to the Virgin Islands on his plane. That's right. Larry Summers was on the Lolita Express. In 2003, Epstein pledged $30 million to Harvard to create the program for evolutionary dynamics. He recruited Martin Nowak, biologist from Princeton University, to lead it. That's why he also is friends with Steven Pinker as well. Another annoying Harvard professor. On the top floor, Epstein organized discussions on science, psychology, and other subjects, inviting academics from Harvard and MIT to attend. Dershowitz often participated. The 2 men were once photographed there, engaged in conversation, Epstein wearing a Harvard sweatshirt. That famous Epstein Harvard sweatshirt photo. His connection to Israeli politicians also helps the conspiracy theory that he was an intelligence asset. Yes, it does. In the end, Epstein contributed only $6.5 million, according to Boston Globe, but the money was understood at the time to be a first installment. Henry Rozovsky, the former dean, said he hoped Epstein would become one of the leading supporters of science at Harvard. Dershowitz, who became a faculty affiliate of the program that Epstein funded, told the Harvard Crimson reporter that Epstein would benefit Harvard in a lot of ways. He's a lot more interesting than some traditional academics. He called Epstein brilliant and saw that when they talked, debating mathematics, genetics, law, and psychology, nobody finishes a sentence. We cut each other off all the time because we just get it. This is Alan Dershowitz talking about his relationship with his close and personal friend, Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein, he later said, was the only person outside his family whom he trusted to evaluate drafts of his books. His wife once asked whether the friendship would endure if Epstein suddenly filed for bankruptcy. Dershowitz replied, I would be as interested in him as a friend if we had hamburgers on the boardwalk in Coney Island and talked about his ideas. He was like, bro, we share mutual interests. You don't understand. It's not about how much money he has. Even if he was a broke boy, I would still maintain the mutual interest that I have with him. Okay? What that mutual interest is remains to be seen, at least in this article. But perhaps, maybe that mutual interest has something to do with the Los Angeles Times op-ed that Alan Dershowitz wrote. The math they were debating was what the age of consent should be reduced to. Yes. Oh my God. Epstein could be a loyal supporter. Early in the relationship, they contacted Orrin Kramer, the founder of the hedge fund Boston Provident. Said that he wanted to invest several $100,000 from Dershowitz. It was a small sum for Kramer's fund, but Epstein, who had recently invested $30 million in the fund, was a significant client. The next year, after the fund sustained enormous losses, Epstein contacted him again and said, one of us is going to make Alan whole, and if I have to do it, that's an outcome you will regret. Kramer was taken aback. Dershowitz had signed papers, which are standard among hedge fund investors, acknowledging that his money was at significant risk. Ultimately, though, he agreed that he would personally restore Dershowitz's investment if Epstein left the remainder of the money he controlled in the fund. Dershowitz says that he had never heard that Epstein had made this call and that he understood Kramer had restored his money because he felt a moral obligation. Why would a hedge fund manager ever feel a moral obligation to restore your money? On campus, Dershowitz was controversial for his increasingly hawkish views on Israel. At times, Epstein lent support against political enemies. In January 2007, oh brother, more mutual interests. In January 2007, the evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers learned that he was to receive the prestigious Crayford Prize in Biosciences, and Martin Nowak invited him to celebrate with a talk that Epstein had funded. That April, Trivers sent Dershowitz a letter criticizing his rationalization of Israeli attacks on Lebanese civilians. The summer before, during Israel's conflict, was Hezbollah. If Dershowitz persisted in this kind of argument, he wrote, he could look forward to a visit from me. Nazis and Nazi-like apologists such as yourself need to be confronted directly, Dershowitz called the Harvard police, and in a Wall Street Journal op-ed complained that radical goons had sent him threatening messages. He's, by the way, what do you call it? Trivers, Robert Trivers wrote that to Alan Dershowitz, saying, you're a Nazi and Nazi-like apologists need to be confronted directly. On May 25th, the day of the party, Trivers was chatting with students when he got an urgent message from Nowak. He was canceling the party under orders from someone he would not identify because Trivers had called a Harvard professor a Nazi. Oh, wow. Alan Dershowitz, a story that never changes. Okay? Hey, are you going to be ableist today? You're just like your uncle? Yes. I am going to be ableist today. As always. Every day. And homophobic and transphobic and racist and misogynistic. Where were we? Save it for Reddit chatter. Why? Is that a thing that's popping off now? Hasan is ableist. But ultimately he agreed. Oh, where was it? Dershowitz asked him, wait, what coordinate? Oh, in October 2005. Okay, finally we got. I had invited 20 people. There's no way to contact all of them. Most painful thing. Shriver said that Epstein later acknowledged that he made the call. He apologized for having stopped my talk, so actually formed a bond between Jeffrey and me. Wait, so Dersh is critical of Israel today? Wait, what? No. Alan Dershowitz has always been a massive advocate for Israel and Israel's war crimes. This other professor called him a Nazi for defending Israel's actions against civilians in Lebanon. New here, what is your full name? It's such a weird question to ask. Like, it's literally, look underneath me. Do you see this? It's like my username. In October 2005, Epstein discovered that the Palm Beach police were investigating him for abusing underage girls, and he quickly called Dershowitz to ask him to coordinate the defense. Dershowitz later wrote in an article for the American Bar Association that he hesitated since Epstein was an acquaintance, and lawyers are cautioned against representing people they know socially. But ultimately, he agreed. Why did he agree? Perhaps because he could, cut himself a deal as well in the process. He has since said that Epstein's case is the only one out of more than 250 in his career that he regrets taking. Dershowitz told me that he was misled about the severity of the allegations, said that Epstein had told him that there were only half a dozen accusers who were underage and that they slipped through the cracks, they presented fake ID. He added, when I later learned the extent of this, I was shocked. Sure. The investigation of Epstein had begun in March 2005 when two worried parents went to the Palm Beach Police Department. You guys know this story already. I'm going to skip through it. But yeah, Epstein routinely got other girls who were also young to recruit underage girls from high schools and the like in his scheme. Epstein's former house manager, Juana Leslie, told police that Epstein had as many as 3 massages a day and that towards the end of his employment in 2002, the women giving them were younger and younger. Some recipients of massages were also potentially Alan Jebediah Dershowitz. According to victims, Epstein's scouts were instructed to find girls who met his physical criteria, nymphishly thin, with no tattoos. He sent gifts to favorites, bouquet of roses, planes, a car, blah, blah, blah. He also worked with a modeling agency owned by a friend to procure underage girls from abroad, providing them with housing and paying their visa fees. Epstein's most steadfast companion was Ghislaine Maxwell. All right, let's get back to the relationship with Dershowitz, though. Because this then turns into a Jeffrey Epstein story. And I want to know, the police chief, Michael Ryder, recalled in a deposition that when he discussed the investigation with the state's attorney, Barry Krischer, he said, "Let's go for it. This is an adult male in his 50s who has sexual contact with children." But once Dershowitz got involved, Ryder said, "The tone and tenor of the discussions of this case with Mr. Krischer changed completely." Detective Joseph Riccari, the lead investigator that later testified in a meeting he had attended with Dershowitz and Krischer, Dershowitz presented a selection of posts from MySpace in which the girls recounted experiences with alcohol and marijuana. Riccari recalled that Dershowitz set forth the posts as evidence that the girls were not to be believed. Some profound legal work from one of the most brilliant minds in a tenured Harvard professor, Professor Emeritus, lifetime professor of Harvard, talking to the cops and saying, well, these girls, these minors, had posts about alcohol and marijuana, so don't believe them. Ryder said that in a deposition that he and Riccari were under constant surveillance for months. Their movements were tracked and their trash was searched. Oh, yeah. Also hired private investigators against the cops and detectives as well. Ryder also testified that Dershowitz had contacted private investigators to look into his background. Dershowitz and Epstein deny any involvement in this. Dershowitz focused especially on a young woman identified in the police report as A.H., who had given some of the most damaging testimony. A.H. told Riccari that she had started going to Epstein's house in 2003 when she was 16. She was saving up for a camping trip to Maine. At times, Epstein photographed her naked. He often took nude pictures of girls and displayed them around the house. He sent roses when she starred in her high school play. She had set a rule with Epstein that they wouldn't have intercourse, but one day he pushed her down and forcibly penetrated her. She rebuffed him. "What are you doing?" Dershowitz sent Recarey a letter about AH containing what he described as a troublesome and telling illustration of her character. He said that he had sent 2 investigators to speak with her, instructing them to take notes because we feared that she, an accomplished drama student, might try to mislead them as successfully as she misled others. Demon. Straight demon. Alan Dershowitz. The investigators, he continued, were quite shocked at the overwhelming, non-stop barrage of profanity from what initially appeared to be only a young woman with a slight build and soft demeanor. Like, notice how the way he's like ritualistically humiliating the victims, Alan Dershowitz is, by doing character assassination on minors who are victim to statutory rape, okay? By saying they curse, or by saying they talk about marijuana, or they talk about alcohol. That's insane. He also enclosed snippets from AH's presence on social media. She has chosen herself to go by the nickname of Pimp Juice, and the site goes on in detail, including photos of her apparent fascination with marijuana. By the way, Dershowitz denies gathering information from social media and says that the letter was composed by someone else in his office, although it bears his signature and is written in the first person. He suggested her claims about Epstein were motivated by a desire for money. He publicized the accusations in Daily Mail, saying that AH, a minor, by the way, had a long record of lying, theft, and blaming others for her crimes. You know, slut shaming, the legal defense for a international sex trafficker, pedophile. Fun stuff overall. In June 2006, a grand jury called by Krischer, the state's attorney, charged Epstein with 1 count of soliciting prostitution with no mention of underage girls. There was no requirement that he register as a sex offender and no mandatory jail time. To Epstein, leniency seemed appropriate. He once likened his offense to that of a person who steals a bagel. So that's why I said Dershowitz is lying. When he says Jeffrey Epstein thought that it wasn't appropriate. But Ryder felt that the charges were insufficient. He requested a federal investigation, and the FBI, in a 14-month inquiry called Operation Leap Year, identified at least 34 victims of Epstein. Prosecutors prepared a 53-page indictment, which could have resulted in a life sentence. Dershowitz argued that the federal prosecution was unjustified. In July 2007, he and another defense lawyer also wrote to prosecutors, "As we believe we persuaded you, Mr. Epstein never targeted minors," which he had. Epstein's lawyers reportedly said that he was being unfairly pursued because of his wealth. During the next 2 months, Epstein's team negotiated for a better deal with the U.S. Attorney in Miami, Alexander Acosta, who went on to become Secretary of Labor in the Trump administration. This is something I talked about as well. He was a top federal prosecutor in Florida at the time. They arrived at a non-prosecution agreement in which the federal government would throw out his indictment if Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state felony charges for solicitation of prostitution, one involving a minor. What was really unique about this deal, as I've said before, is that it featured 2 unusual facets. One, claiming that at the top of the hour, you have to see a 3-minute ad break. Unless you're subscribed for $5 or for free with a Twitch Prime. If you no longer want to see those ads, all you need to do is subscribe for $5 or for free. Listen, don't yell at me. That's just what it says in the deal, okay? Here's the 3-minute ad break now. You can also get gifted a sub if you're lucky. It contained a provision among granting immunity to any potential co-conspirators. Okay? Very interesting stuff, guys. That's odd. That's interesting. And it was made without informing Epstein's accusers, a violation of the Crime Victim Rights Act. Dershowitz said, I was not directly involved in any decision not to inform the victims. That was not my responsibility. Well, that sure seems strange, don't it? How did that happen? Anyway, NATO PDAS in shambles. Oh. On June 30th, 2008, Epstein pleaded guilty. He was given a brief sentence, 18 months in a county jail with access to a lenient work release program. 6 days a week, he was allowed to leave for an office nearby where he received visitors, including, one deputy recently told the Associated Press, a number of young women. In the history of pedophilia, there has never been such a sweetheart deal. While Epstein was in jail, a friend asked what he was reading. De Profundis, he replied, referring to the letter Oscar Wilde wrote from prison to his lover, Lord Alfred Douglas. I don't know why that's relevant. All right. Anyway, after 13 months, Epstein was released at his mansion in New York. He had a mural painted of himself in jail, telling visitors that it was a reminder that he could always go back. Dershowitz says that after Epstein got out of jail, they no longer socialized. He sometimes still visited the mansion, but only to offer legal advice. Oh, so Alan Dershowitz was lying when he said he only professionally and legally, he only talked to him in a legal setting. Interesting. So he went to his house, but for legal guidance. Got it. The victims, too, wanted to distance themselves from Epstein. Virginia Jeffrey had left his orbit in 2002. Soon after she turned 19, Maxwell and Epstein had agreed to send her to Thailand for a 3-week course of massage and arranged for her to bring back a young girl for Epstein. Jesus fucking Christ. There, Jeffrey met an Australian man, Robert Jeffrey, who was on vacation. They fell in love and they were married 10 days later. For 5 years, Jeffrey had no contact with Epstein or Maxwell. She and her husband moved into a house outside of Sydney. They had 2 children, and Jeffrey got pregnant again. Then one afternoon, she answered her cell phone and heard Maxwell's exuberant voice. Why is cooperate written like this? Hi, how's life? Maxwell told her that Epstein was being investigated, that if she refused to cooperate with police, she'd be taken care of. Jeffrey told me that she declined the offer, but reassured Maxwell that she wouldn't speak to anyone. A few days later, Epstein and his lawyer called her to say it directly. She was frightened that they had been able to track her down. I wanted to start a brand new life with my husband. And when Ghislaine and Jeffrey called, it was like, oh my God, this isn't going to go away. That is when I started having to deal with the past. What does an umlaut O sound like? We have it in Turkish as well. So it would be cooperate. 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 Sounds positively Nordic. In September 2008, Jeffrey got a letter from the U.S. Department of Justice informing her that as a victim of Epstein, she was entitled to sue him for damages. Jeffrey engaged a Miami lawyer named Catherine Ezell, and the following May, she sued Epstein as Jane Doe 102. Epstein eventually settled her suit, paying an undisclosed sum, but the story persisted. In 2001, in February, Jeffrey heard from Sharon Churcher, a reporter for the Mail on Sunday, inquiring about her time with Epstein. Churcher asked if she had any way to substantiate her story. Jeffrey had a picture of her posing with Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. She literally was on the plane the next day. The Mail on Sunday later paid her $140,000 for the use of the photo and $20,000 for giving interviews. This was the famous photo that you've seen. Churcher was the first journalist she had ever met, and Jeffrey said, I felt like we were buddies. As Churcher showed her pictures of prominent men in Epstein's circle, Jeffrey identified some of those she'd had sex with. The next month, the Mail on Sunday published a series of articles focused on Prince Andrew, which brought new attention to the case. 2 FBI agents contacted Jeffrey, saying that they wanted to reopen the investigation, and they soon came to Australia to hear her recount her experience. The umlaut is an annoying thing that the New Yorker is doing. Atlantic has a great piece on that. Wait, really? It's a diaresis. So what? Why? The story also attracted notice of lawyers working with other Epstein victims. That spring, Jeffrey got a call from Bradley Edwards, an attorney in Florida. He explained that he was working with Paul Cassell, former federal judge, on a suit that might overturn the non-prosecution agreement, allowing a new inquiry into Epstein's case. He asked if she would talk about her experience. In December 2014, Jeffrey set up a foundation, Victims Refuse Silence, to help survivors of sexual abuse and trafficking. She claimed that Epstein had abused her and had trafficked her to powerful friends. She named 3: Jean-Luc Brunel, a modeling agent, Prince Andrew, and Alan Dershowitz. She asserted that she'd had sex with Dershowitz at least 6 times in Epstein's various residences on his island, in a car, and on his plane. When I asked why she had decided to name Dershowitz, she said, Jeffrey got away with it, basically, and Dershowitz was one of the people who enabled that to happen. She went on, Dershowitz thinks he's a tyrant and can get away with anything, and I wanted to say, I might be as meek as a mouse, but I'm going to hold you accountable. After Jeffrey's claims became public, Buckingham police empathetically denied the allegations about the Duke of York, because they said, it's simply a part of our culture to engage in acts of pedophilia. That's right. We are the Buckingham Palace, after all. You do know that the monarchs are able to engage in acts of noncery. It is perfectly legal and permissible in our culture to engage in a little bit of noncery. That's the Buckingham Palace for you. That's right. Very nice. Brunel issued a denial. Dershowitz began an urgent campaign to clear his name, which has lasted for almost 5 years. Starting in January 2015, he made a series of television appearances to dispute Jeffrey's claims, using some of the same language that he had employed to describe Epstein's victims a decade earlier. He called her a serial liar, a prostitute, and a bad mother who could not be believed against somebody with an unscathed reputation like me. Not unscathed, by the way. He insisted that Jeffrey had made the whole thing up for a whole cloth, out of whole cloth, in search of a big payday. When a TV reporter in Miami questioned his characterization of Jeffrey as a sex abuse victim and as a prostitute, Dershowitz replied, she made her own decisions in life. Cool. At Harvard, 38 of Dershowitz's fellow professors signed a letter supporting his right to defend himself. Among themselves, they debated whether the allegations could be true and whether he was employing the right strategy. I know a little bit about his private life. Not much, Charles Fried said. Harvard, a beacon of prosperity, an institution of higher learning that is so good, so perfect. I think he's very much a family man. I was inclined to believe him. But you know the old saying, you lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas. Epstein was a very hard client to represent without getting smudged in that way. It can be done. First of all, it's ridiculous. The problem isn't that Alan Dershowitz represented Jeffrey Epstein. The problem is Alan Dershowitz had a friendly, familial relationship with Jeffrey Epstein prior to his representation of Jeffrey Epstein. This is so stupid. Lawyers defend murderers all the time. That doesn't mean they become murderers themselves. Okay? They don't go out and do murders together and then defend them. But that requires a little more distance and discipline, and also willing to eschew fun, and Dershowitz is perhaps willing to show. He's literally talking about having sex with minors. Oh my God. Harvard professors playing fast and loose with the with fun, with the terminology of fun. Fried noted that when Jeffrey made her claims about Dershowitz, he responded in a typical Dershowitz fashion. Attack, attack, attack. He made her the defendant, and he attacked. And I think that probably had some effect. But other peers of his think that his insistence on winning the case in the court of public opinion has had disastrous results. He created the issue by attacks on Virginia Jeffrey. A longtime colleague said, it would have been better to let the allegation die of its own weight. In media appearances, Dershowitz argued that Jeffrey's lawyers, Edwards and Cassell, had conspired with her to fabricate testimony that would negate Epstein's non-prosecution agreement. If they could find a lawyer who helped draft the agreement, who also was a criminal having sex, wow, that could help them blow up the agreement. Dude, this is so... Okay, here Alan Dershowitz is now, once again, defending Jeffrey Epstein. Okay? He's literally saying, oh, the prosecution plea bargain was absolutely perfectly valid, and now they're making stuff up so they can attack Jeffrey Epstein, who he's defending here again, one more time. He told CNN, so they sat down together, the three of them, these two sleazy, unprofessional, disbarable lawyers. They said, who would fit into this description? They and the woman got together and contrived and made this up, he declared. The end result of this case should be she should go to jail, the lawyer should be disbarred, and everybody should understand that I am completely and totally innocent. The case had continued, he suggested. Only because Edwards and Cassell were prepared to lie, cheat, and steal. Noting that Jeffrey had made her allegations in a statement rather than a sworn affidavit, he said that their lawyers encouraged that choice because they know if they submit a sworn affidavit, they could go to jail. Soon afterwards, Jeffrey submitted a sworn affidavit. I've recently seen a former Harvard law professor identified as Alan Dershowitz on television calling me a liar. He is lying by denying that he had sex with me. That man is the same man that I had sex with at least 6 times. When I talked with her, she suggested that Dershowitz had made a tactical mistake by attacking her so persistently. The bad mom thing actually hurt the worst, she said. I love my children more than I love my own life. Edwards and Cassell, who strongly denied Dershowitz's claims, sued him for defamation and... How about you cover some real news? Is this Alan Dershowitz? Is Alan Dershowitz in the chat? Take a week off, Alan. Hey, stop looking into Alan Dershowitz's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and Jeffrey Epstein's victims, okay? Please, cover some real news and not this. Excuse me. Please, can you cover some real news and not Alan Dershowitz's news about his relationship and involvement with Jeffrey Epstein? Please, that's not me. But I do think that Alan Dershowitz is very attractive. Just a cool guy. He's Dersh posting. Edwards and Cassell, who strongly denied Dershowitz's claims, sued him for defamation in January 2015, and Dershowitz countersued. Jeffrey became a witness. She was represented pro bono by David Boaz. Dershowitz and Boaz have known each other since they were young lawyers, when Dershowitz was teaching at Harvard and Boaz was at Cravath, Swain & Moore. He's among one of the highest paid trial lawyers in America, a skillful courtroom tactician with a keen instinct for public opinion. For decades, he has cultivated a reputation as a defender of principle. He represented CBS in a major First Amendment case, prosecuted Microsoft antitrust violations, and fought for marriage equality in Hollingsworth versus Perry. But he had also damaged his reputation by using strikingly aggressive tactics. He represented Theranos. Okay, anyway. Back to Dersh. Met with Jeffrey in 2014 and vetted her story. She was an imperfect witness. She had used drugs throughout the time she was with Epstein, and she acknowledged being hazy on dates. She initially recalled that she started working at Mar-a-Lago when she was almost 16, but employment records showed that she started a year later, meaning that she had been underage for less than a year of the time, which Epstein lent her to his friends. Yet Jeffrey maintained that she never got the face of the men she had had sex with. At 30, she was plain-spoken and direct, with a quiet self-assurance that seemed hard-won. She didn't try to pretend she was perfect. She didn't try and give a constructed narrative. Dershowitz presented his own difficulties as a witness. When tape depositions began, he often refused to answer questions, delivering long soliloquies and furious denunciations. Yes, Chad, she was working at Mar-a-Lago. Virginia Jeffries was working at Mar-a-Lago when Jeffrey Epstein nabbed her. I don't know how else to describe it. Even his own lawyer tried at times to restrain him. Eventually, a special master kind of referee was appointed to help to control the proceedings. The special master repeatedly admonished Mr. Dershowitz, Mr. Dershowitz, I'm asking you to stop, and struck some of his testimony from the record. Dershowitz argued that he was being used as a stalking horse. Boaz's real goal, he said, was to use him as an example to frighten Leslie Wexner into paying a large settlement. He insisted that he never met Jeffrey, that he had never seen photographs of naked girls in Epstein's house, and that he had never seen Epstein with underage girls. If he had, he would have reported him to the authorities. Jeffrey was a serial liar, he said. Nothing she said could be believed. It's so strange how all of the people that keep accusing Jeffrey Epstein and Alan Dershowitz are always just liars, cheats, stealers, and people who do drugs, which is enough reason for, I guess, the criminal justice system to go, yeah, well, maybe this is correct. Maybe you, sir, have not done anything wrong. In cases of sexual abuse, one important legal standard is contemporaneous outcry, in which victims disclose attacks to people they trust soon after the event. Jeffrey, like many of the other women around Epstein, describes herself as isolated and says that she was discouraged from speaking with the girls who came and went from Epstein's homes. But she has said that she talked about Dershowitz with Tony Figueroa, her boyfriend, during the time. Jeffrey described calling him from the island and complaining of being obligated to have sex with O.J. Simpson's lawyer. In January 2016, two attorneys working with Dershowitz tracked Figueroa down to secure an affidavit. Virginia only mentioned Alan Dershowitz, it read. I remember she described Mr. Dershowitz as O.J. Simpson's lawyer. She did not say she had ever had any physical contact with him. Figueroa, who had been arrested several times on minor drug charges, signed the document. Dershowitz also gathered evidence from phone calls with Rebecca Boylan, a girlhood friend of Jeffrey's. In a transcript that he introduced during the deposition, he informs Boylan that he's turning on a tape recorder and asks her to please repeat what you told me previously. Boylan says that Jeffrey was pursuing Dershowitz only to pressure from lawyers and that I've never heard her mention you when we were kids. Dershowitz says, I'm now turning off the tape recorder. Thank you so much. Jeffrey said that Boylan agreed to the call after they had a falling out. Dershowitz said that Boylan contacted him unprompted because she was horrified by what was happening to me. Yeah. Boylan was a big fan of Alan Dershowitz's legal defense, I guess, or his law career. So I guess she reached out unprompted. And certainly not something that Alan Dershowitz had done prior in defending Jeffrey Epstein, which is hire private investigators to comb through every aspect of the lives of the victims in order to humiliate them. Dershowitz told me he wanted the case to go to trial, but in December, he emailed Boaz to discuss a settlement on the condition that Jeffrey acknowledged that her accusation could have been a mistake. He wrote, we should be aiming at a short, simple statement such as the events at issue occurred approximately 15 years ago when I was a teenager, although I believed then and continue to believe that Alan Dershowitz is the person with whom I had sex. Recent developments raise the possibility that this may be a case of mistaken identification. In April 2016, the case settled with no such statement. The press reported that the agreement included a financial arrangement. It's so strange that Alan Dershowitz did not run the course of this case and was willing to agree to a statement that basically didn't even absolve him entirely and then didn't even get that. The press reported that the agreement included a financial arrangement implying that Jeffrey's team had paid. In fact, Dershowitz's insurance company had paid Jeffrey's lawyers. In negotiations, the parties had discussed a figure of nearly $1 million with $50,000 going to Dershowitz, which would allow him to claim a payment. The final amount has not been disclosed. Dershowitz also got a valuable concession. Edwards and Cassell agreed to release a statement saying that it was a mistake to have filed sexual misconduct accusations against Dershowitz. As the statement circulated in news reports, Edwards and Cassell rushed to clarify that they had committed a tactical mistake. They had attached Jeffrey's filings to a case centered on Epstein, not on Dershowitz, because the filings were not directly relevant, but the judge had struck them from the record. Dershowitz in interviews ignored this interpretation and said that he hoped Jeffrey would be investigated for perjury. The previous 15 months, he said, had been like being waterboarded. So he basically made it seem as though Jeffrey's team had paid Alan Dershowitz. That was not the case. Dershowitz's insurance company had paid Jeffrey's lawyers instead. Okay? And some of that went to Dershowitz himself, specifically so he would claim that he got paid. Okay? Dog is gone. And so is the doggy cam. Ironic that he's saying that this was like being waterboarded, because I'm pretty sure Alan Dershowitz might have defended waterboarding too on principle. Dershowitz was free of the lawsuit, but his public stature was diminished. He had retired from Harvard Law at 75. His latest book, Erectile Dysfunction, attracted little interest. He made frequent appearances on Newsmax. Dershowitz remained preoccupied with Jeffrey's allegations. In late 2016, he complained to Boston Magazine that as a result of her claims, he had lost 2 clients and had stopped getting requests to accept honorary degrees. Before an appearance at Johns Hopkins, he was greeted by women wearing duct tape over their mouths holding signs that read, "You are rape culture." Why was him being able to claim that he got paid important to him? Oh, in order to make it seem as though he was, in order to make it seem as though the other side had lost the settlement. I think that's the reason. In the court of public opinion. He wanted to make it seem like he won the settlement. With the election of Trump, he became a regular guest, yada, yada. I don't care about the Trump shit. But yeah, he defended Trump a lot. But when Dershowitz was on Fox News discussing the Mueller investigation, when the host asked him solicitously about the accusations against him, not long before, the Miami Herald had published a deeply reported 3-part series by Julie Brown. Famous. This is like what reignited the Jeffrey Epstein case, if you recall. Julie Brown is a legend. Also part of the reason why local newspapers are important to preserve and save. Okay? Downtown Julie Brown. They offered new details on the Epstein case and negotiations that led to his deal. Dershowitz seemed eager to answer the question. There are emails so far that are secret, but prove that not only was I framed, but who framed me. Have me back on the show when the emails come out. Boy, it will be so interesting because there will be prominent people in handcuffs. Dershowitz has spoken frequently of having incontrovertible proof that Jeffrey is lying. I don't think anybody in the history of law has ever been able to prove a negative so persuasively by so much documentary evidence as I have, he told the New Yorker. His evidence, though, often leads to further disputes. He had pointed to an unpublished memoir by Jeffrey saying, in her manuscripts, she says she has never had sex with me. She does not say this. In her memoir, Dershowitz appears in only one passage. He knocks on the door of a bedroom where Epstein was just finished having sex with Jeffrey, and Epstein invites him for a discussion. Jeffrey writes, Alan's taste for the young and beautiful was the bias for a blossoming business relationship between him and Jeffrey. Well, technically, she didn't say that she had sex with him in the memoir, so obviously like this further puts him for criminal, like further means that he lied. Like even the fucking example that he's using unironically lead him to look worse. How is this possible? Dershowitz also points to emails that Jeffrey sent to the reporter Sharon Churcher several months after their meeting, and she was drafting the manuscript. When Jeffrey asked for help reconstructing the list of men she had compiled, looking at photographs, Churchill mentioned Dershowitz, writing that she and others suspected him of sexual misconduct, and though no proof of that, you probably met him. Jeffrey told me, I can't say what she was thinking, but I think she threw Alan into it, forgetting that I had already mentioned him, even informed her of the experiences I had with him. When Jeffrey's allegations first became public, the Daily News quoted Dershowitz as saying that he had never had a massage at Epstein's home. After the story came out, he quickly asserted that he did have a massage there, though he said it was given by a 50-year-old Russian woman named Olga, and added, and this is the famous part, I kept my underwear on. In any case, he says during the... That's a famous... In any case, he says during the years that Jeffrey lived with Epstein, he never met her. His travel records demonstrate that it was impossible. I examined the records for a few hours, though I wasn't allowed to copy them. Every day had been accounted for, and in most cases there was documentation, a credit card bill, a public appearance, but some of the dates were supported only by a handwritten date book entry, New York, or by a telephone call from a landline, which could have been made by anyone at that address. And Dershowitz lived in New York from September 2000 to June 2001, when Jeffrey was often in Epstein's mansion. His schedule contains notations about meeting with Jeffrey. In 2015, he hired a security firm led by former FBI Director Louis Freeh to look into Jeffrey's claims. Dershowitz provided a one-page summary of the inquiry, which said that investigators have found no evidence to support the accusations. Oh, nice. Oh, that's cool. That he hired an investigator that cleared him of any wrongdoing. The summary notes that Jeffrey described seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton on Epstein's island and said that Secret Service records show no evidence of such a visit. Gore and Clinton deny visiting the island, although Clinton has acknowledged taking multiple trips on Epstein's plane. The summary points to no other specific discrepancies. When the New Yorker and Dershowitz asked Dershowitz to see supporting documentation for the report, he said that he didn't have it. Freeh's firm did not respond to requests for substantiation. Jeffrey told me that Freeh's investigators had never interviewed her. Huh. What the hell? Dershowitz had frequently argued that Jeffrey never accused them until 2014. He pointed me to an FBI report detailing agents' interviews with Jeffrey from 2011 and said that it proved that she didn't mention him. I obtained a copy. The majority of it is redacted, including a list of individuals Jeffrey identified from photographs. Jeffrey says she named Dershowitz in 2009 to Catherine Ezel, the attorney in Miami. Ezel declined to comment, but in depositions from the time, she questions witnesses about Dershowitz's visits to Epstein's house. Dershowitz says that Ezel's supervisor, Robert Joseph Berg, assured him that no one had made any accusations against him in those years. But Joseph Berg told me, I've never told Alan Dershowitz or anyone else what this client or any other client has told me. He is wrong. Dershowitz also claimed that Boys must have known that his client was lying. He cites a telephone call apparently recorded in secret in which he and Boys discussed the possibility of settling a defamation suit. Dershowitz allowed me to listen to it again, refusing to let me make a copy. The recording has frequent stops and starts, and in many places is unintelligible. Dude, Alan Dershowitz doing IDF-style propaganda to clear his name is pretty funny. Like, this is one step removed from, you know how, like, the IDF will do, like, fake phone calls and shit? Yeah, it's like, here's a recreation of this victim saying she lied. Dershowitz emphasizes a passage in which Boys imagines a conversation with Jeffrey. We know you believe that you had relations with Professor Dershowitz. We have now reviewed the documentary evidence and we're convinced that your belief is wrong. Boys told me that the conversation was hypothetical, a way of exploring how he might persuade an aggrieved client to accept the settlement if Dershowitz could offer definitive proof. He did a fucking literal, like, he did a Hasanabi clipped out of context compilation. And then and then in the phone call, foolishly, thought that Alan Dershowitz wouldn't record him, and then fucking clip it out of context. He also showed me an email that he sent to associates afterwards, speculating that Dershowitz had intended to gather evidence. From the way he kept trying to put words in my mouth, I suspected he was taping the call. I challenge my accusers to tweet a direct accusation against me so I can sue them for defamation, he wrote. They won't because they know they made up the story for money. Dershowitz argued that by not making allegations in public, Jeffrey and Boaz were taking advantage of a legal principle known as the litigation privilege, which forbids defamation suits based on court testimony. Journalists, however, are permitted to report on that testimony, which can provide a canny lawyer with a safe way to release contested information to the public. By the time, this is the worst part, by the way. This is the reason. By the time Jeffrey had made her allegations about Dershowitz, she could no longer sue him for having abused her as a minor because the statute of limitations had expired. Dershowitz once offered during an interview to waive any statute that prevented Jeffrey's claims from being tested in court, but when her lawyers asked him to waive it to allow a civil suit, he refused. The only way for Jeffrey to test her allegations in court was in a defamation suit. In 2015, when Jeffrey's allegations against Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein became public, Maxwell called them obvious lies. In September, Boaz and Macaulay filed a defamation suit against Maxwell on Jeffrey's behalf. This is the big suit. Maxwell, of course, settled just before a trial was to begin. The amount was undisclosed, but Jeffrey reportedly received a multi-million-dollar settlement. That's crazy. The allegations of the Maxwell case did not leak to the press. Judge Sweet sealed all the documents. Fucking asshole. Among them was a sworn affidavit filed by a British South African woman named Sarah Ransom, who joined the case as Jane Doe 43 and was represented pro bono. I recently spoke with Ransom, who's now 34. She is voluble. I'm South African. I'm not a wallflower, but she says, still deeply affected by her experience with Epstein. The trauma I have gone through in the last 10 years, I wouldn't even wish on Jeffrey and Ghislaine. Ransom was introduced to Epstein in September 2006 when she was 22. She had gone through a painful breakup. And then, it just describes the same exact stuff about massages and how they turn sexual in nature. Ransom said that she dreamed of studying for FIT. By the way, for Ransom, as for the other woman, these benefits depended on her having sex with Epstein and with his friends. In her affidavit, she mentioned Dershowitz as one of those friends. Ransom told me that she had invented the tapes to draw attention to Epstein's behavior and make him believe that she had evidence that would come out if he harmed me. In 2017, Boaz represented Ransom in a lawsuit against Epstein for sex trafficking. Last December, Epstein paid an undisclosed sum to settle. It's always, dude, it's crazy. All of these people, they keep settling for major. Second woman claims billionaire perv Jeffrey Epstein directed her to have sex with Alan Dershowitz. Dershowitz denied that he had ever met Ransom. The villain here is David Boaz, who was exploiting a crazy woman in order to get revenge against me, he says. Interesting stuff. Anyway. So, Alan Dershowitz claims that he stopped having any relations whatsoever with Jeffrey Epstein is false, but he can claim at least that it's a legal nature after his court case, which he does claim. But he did still see him. He did visit him. And all these women that won suits against Jeffrey Epstein that also named Alan Dershowitz in their suits. Alan Dershowitz, who has written in public an article about how it should be legal to fuck people under the age of 18. Just very interesting that, all these people keep seeming to milk him for what he has, apparently. Of course, the non-prosecution agreement got renewed scrutiny after reports of his arrest, Jeffrey Epstein's arrest, his new arrest, Acosta resigned as Secretary of Labor after the public outcry. Speaking in his own defense, he argued that the agreement had been more stringent than what Barry Krischer, the state's attorney, had recommended. This was a backhanded tribute to Dershowitz and Epstein's other defenders. Without their legal efforts, Krischer would have probably recommended more significant charges. But Dershowitz was distancing himself from the case. In March, when reporters outside of a court hearing asked him if he was still in touch with Epstein, he said, "You never stop being someone's lawyer. I'll always take his call." Now he told NPR, "I have no relationship with him." Huh. Also, a second set of Jeffrey Epstein court filings are unsealed in New York. Breaking news. While we were covering this, the new filings today comprise of 19 exhibits totaling 327 pages of previously sealed court documents. The release comes a day after the first group of more than 3 dozen court filings were unsealed.